Hopefully everybody had a chance to grab a snack, some lunch. I know I did. I'm not going to talk a whole lot more because you've already heard me talk a lot this morning, but I just want to introduce the organizer for our next session, Becky Long, who's with the People and Pollinator Action Network. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about your panel discussion.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for having me and for everyone attending and caring about pollinators and what we can do to support them. I'm really excited today to get to be part of this panel where we're going to talk about legislation, state policy, federal action, kind of a combination of things that we can do to help support pollinators. The theme this year is really about collaboration and how we can leverage collaboration to help protect pollinators. We know that pollinators are critical and that they need our urgent action and support, and that could take a number of tools at all levels. Some of those tools are policy making that can come in a number of formats, be it funding or legislation, other support. And so that's what we'll dig into a little bit today, and thinking through how others who do work in this space can help us think about how to approach it, what tools we need, and how we can help protect pollinators. I'm really excited to be joined by a couple of our legislative champs today. I'm going to introduce them in a moment, and we have a special message from Congressman Neguse, who is back in DC working hard on a number of these issues and has made some time to send us a video that we'll play here in just a moment. I wanted to first just start by saying we are really sorry to note that State Representative Monica Duran will not be able to join us today. She's had a family emergency, but we do have another Representative, Matt Gray, who will be joining us later today. So we'll bring those panelists up in a minute, but for now, I wanted to go ahead and turn it over to this quick message that Representative Neguse has sent us while he's back in DC, hopefully voting very soon on some important legislation.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Neguse, and I have the honor and the privilege of representing Colorado's 2nd Congressional District in the United States Congress. And it's so great to be with you today for the 2021 Colorado Pollinators Summit. A big thank you to my alma mater, the University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado State University, the City of Boulder, and the many organizations that made today's event possible. And for all of you here today listening, I want to say thank you for sharing in and lifting up the simple premise that this earth is our home, and it is our duty to protect it and to safeguard it for future generations. Central to this effort is protecting our biodiversity through collaborative conservation and restoration. Over 50% of Colorado's 2nd Congressional District, which I'm proud to represent, is designated as public lands. So when we talk about conservation of our treasured public places, protection of our wildlife, and bold investments in biodiversity, these are things that we understand viscerally across our communities in Colorado and in the 2nd District in particular. The health of our nature is inextricably linked to the health of our communities, the health of our economy, and the legacy that we leave behind for future generations. In 2020, as many of you know, our communities experienced devastating, record-breaking wildfires. The Cameron Peak and East Troublesome fires were literally 2 of the largest wildfires in the history of Colorado. They caused many of my constituents to evacuate their homes and led to the damage of many businesses and structures. For these communities, our investments to restore our forests, our efforts to reduce the public lands maintenance backlog, and our work to invest in fire science and mitigation and adaptation are not just lofty policy conversations. They are really life or death. These reasons and many more drive my commitment to environmental protection, to climate action, to conservation. Because conservation is about more than just our lands. It's about our economy, our communities, our wildlife, our ecosystems, and our future. Earlier this year, I introduced a resolution which calls for a national strategy on biodiversity. We know that the decline of biodiversity presents a direct threat to the security, the health, and the well-being of our communities and our planet. Human-caused activity has led to the damage of ecosystems, the exploitation of wildlife, increased pollution, and the acceleration of climate change. As you all know, pollinators really are one of the most well-known examples of how we benefit from biodiversity and how we can in turn conserve that biodiversity. It's clear to me, I suspect clear to many of you that we need a coordinated whole of government approach to tackle these issues. And the United States should play a leadership role on the international stage in this regard. It's time for the US to take an ambitious global approach to address these issues and lead the world in conservation and climate action. And that is exactly what this resolution calls for. You know, I've been honored during this Congress to serve as the chairman of the House Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands, and to launch our Restoring Our Lands and Communities agenda, which really is a vision for a brighter future. For us, that means really listening to our communities first, right? Investing in our outdoor recreation economy, conserving our public lands, safeguarding through a reimagined century conservation corps, and strengthening our natural resources workforce. Our vision, by the way, for a 21st century CCC will make historic investments in our forests and our watersheds to help suppress Western wildfires and tackle the climate crisis. Bottom line, it is time for bold action for our planet and for our future. I have a young daughter. She's 3 years old, just started preschool, and she doesn't yet understand the scale of these crises that we face or the profound impact that humans can cause and are causing on our environment. But she does understand the taste of snow, the beauty of leaves, the shapes of stones and flowers, and the enjoyment of breathing fresh air, walking our dog Teddy outside, taking a hike in Rocky Mountain National Park. Her simple awe of our Earth is something that I keep in mind, and I think that we all should keep in mind as we craft solutions and as we consider the Earth as it is, that we seek to protect, and the damage that will be done if we don't take effective action. So I will leave you by simply saying this: it is a new day here in Washington, D.C. Last Congress, we introduced countless bills focused on protecting our environment, leading on climate action. But with President Biden in the White House, with Secretary Deb Haaland, my friend and colleague, leading the Department of Interior, we have a fresh start and new momentum to get many of these provisions passed into law. With the President's Build Back Better agenda being considered in Congress as we speak, we are poised to pass historic investments for our climate, our forests, our environment. I'm very hopeful, incredibly hopeful about our future. I'm inspired by the momentum that we're seeing around conservation and climate action. And of course, I'm grateful for all of you helping every step of the way. It's time for boldness. It's time for brave steps forward to safeguard the future. I believe the willpower is there to accomplish it and to move the needle for our communities. And I'm just so grateful for your leadership and your advocacy to ensure a just and a healthy and a sustainable future. So please continue engaging on these issues, contributing your voices. Policymakers are taking notice. And as we continue to partner together to listen and to follow the lead of our local communities, I know that there is a tremendous amount that we can accomplish. So thank you all for including me in today's important event, and I certainly look forward to seeing all of you again soon. Thanks so much. Stay healthy and stay hopeful.
Well, thank you so much to Congressman Neguse and his office for working so hard to get us that message as they're juggling a lot of big issues back in DC. If folks have questions on any of the issues he spoke to, obviously we won't have someone from his office to answer them today, but we'd be happy to try to run some things down offline. And if you want to chat those, feel free, or we can help connect you to their office as needed. But today we're going to now turn and pivot a little bit towards the state legislative efforts and what that looks like. And I'm really pleased that we'll be joined by two guests today. Senator Steve Fenberg is with us, and I think he should already be in the queue. So if he wants to turn his camera on, we'll get him. And then we're just awaiting the arrival of Representative Matt Gray, who, as I mentioned, is going to be graciously able to pinch hit for us today, but had a couple things he's juggling. So he will be joining us in just a moment. But I don't believe he's on yet. So I'll call him in when he's here. But welcome, Senator Fenberg. Thank you so much for joining us. It is very nice to see you.
Good to see you, Becky. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. We're face to face and also not. So hopefully I'm looking somewhere near your face as we talk. Sorry if that's awkward. But the beauty of modern technology means we can do this and help keep everyone safe. So thank you for joining us. I wanted to just highlight a few of Senator Finberg's accomplishments. There's a long list, but from an early age, Senator Finberg has been working to help influence and change Colorado politics and make sure the right folks are at the table and all folks are at the table to help make decisions. And so in addition to having been a champion on a number of issues that folks in this audience care about around pollinators and sustainability, he also plays a leading role on election reform issues. He was part of a team of legislators and leadership this year that passed historic and really transformational funding around transportation here in Colorado. And he's done so many other countless issues. So he's got a lot of great experience working on big issues, getting big things done, and sometimes facing really strong opposition, really well-resourced opposition. We spent a lot of hours together working on some oil and gas policy a few years ago and are probably bonded in trauma by that, among other issues. But part of why I reached out to his office was because of that background and experience. I think he's in a unique position to talk about what it takes to get policy change made at the state legislature and what that looks like. But I maybe wanted to start today, since we just had this message from Congressman Neguse, and hopefully even later this week or later today, we may see movement, maybe, knock on wood, on some federal legislation, and just maybe start off the top in one, welcoming you and thanking you for joining us, but two, just sort of seeing if you have anything you would highlight for this group who cares about biodiversity, cares about pollinators, as we start thinking about how some of these really transformational federal funds could come to Colorado, and ways that this audience might want to think about engaging their organizations or individuals to help shape some of those issues to benefit pollinators and help support Colorado in getting our share of funds.
Great. Well, thanks, Becky, and thanks for the invite and for hosting this. It's always good to chat with folks about pollinators. I know a lot of the folks probably on today are in my district, but I love being able to connect with people from all over the state that care about this issue and biodiversity and the environmental and climate crisis that we're facing right now. I think it's a really good question, and something that we have been dealing with for the last year or so is really how we as a state can work with the federal government and how we can be ready to sort of be the vehicle to get big things done that the federal government wants to get done, but has to have states really do the work on the ground. So of course, the ARPA funding and the other resources that have come from Congress wanting to do something about the crisis we're living in right now and have been for some time, kind of provided that that model. I wouldn't say it always goes smoothly when you inject that much money, and basically your requirement of the state is that it just gets spent fast. It gets clunky. But what we've learned over the last several months is that the better the state is in being prepared to have ways to spend that money, the more likely the process is going to go well. And by that, I think one of the, you mentioned the transportation bill. I think that's one thing that we've had in mind is we know that there's potential for infrastructure funding, for instance. So we thought about what can we do as a state to make sure that we have systems set up so when there's funding available, we can sort of raise our hand and say, hey, federal government, we're a good state to send some of those resources because we already have a plan. We already know what to do with it. We can spend the money fast. We can do it efficiently. We can do it effectively. And I think that's going to be the case for a lot of other issues in the near future. And so the more we can pass legislation at the state level, even if there isn't adequate funding for it, but set up sort of a structure. So if and when those resources arrive, we have a way to spend them in a way to do it effectively. This is at the state level, but it's also at the city and county level. Because some of those funds do go directly to local governments. Some go to associations and then distributed to local governments. But a lot of it will go to the state, and then the state will be in the same position where we then sort of take the role of the federal government had with the state, where we then have to re-grant the money out. And we want to know it's going to communities that have a good plan they have a track record and that they can hit the ground running. So the more we can do that work ahead of time, the better. I think as a state, we've been doing a pretty good job at that. We've learned a lot over the last several months. We're going to continue to learn, but I think it was a good sort of training ground for what hopefully will be more legislation getting passed and good priorities coming down from DC that we can implement quickly here.
Great, thanks. And I'm glad you mentioned the local connectivity piece. I know we have a number of folks who do not only care about state and federal work, but do a lot of work at the local level. So I think it's a great flag to be talking with local communities about how they might be lining up for resources as well. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you. I don't think we have Rep. Gray just yet, so I think we'll move into some of the other questions. And I guess one thing, so as I mentioned, Senator, part of the reason I had reached out to your office is you've just been involved in so many conversations, and folks may know that you're also the majority leader of the Senate and play a leadership role in running the Senate day to day and making the trains run on time, or trying desperately to do so. I think you do a pretty good job. So it's busy. There's a lot happening. You have 35 members of the Senate. All of them have at least 5 bills, some more. And I guess I just ask, can you share some things you've seen in your perspective, both as a member, but also in leadership, of what do you think it takes for groups who are advocating at the state level to really break through all of that noise? What are some key tips you have for folks who want to help position the issues they care about to be something that legislators are able to act on and want to act on and lead on?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the important thing to know is that this work takes time. It takes a lot of investment of resources, and it's it's something that some of these big bills, these big ideas, can take several years to get across the finish line, and that's probably a good and a bad thing. Our democracy was not set up to be able to make big changes very fast. Unfortunately, we have some very big problems that we need big changes on, and we need them fast. But a lot of great groups have done work and kind of done the groundwork and done the investment that needs to happen to be able to make some of these changes happen. And I think we're seeing the payoff of that now in a lot of ways. I think the important thing to know is that the legislative session is January to May, but by no means is that the only time of the year when you should be engaging legislators or working on policy ideas or doing community organizing. That work really, unfortunately, has to be done year round. And that also includes, participating in elections. And it doesn't have to mean that you are advocating for someone to be elected or, against somebody, but it means that there is an important role to play when it comes to educating legislators and in some ways educating voters so they then can put pressure on elected officials. And so the more awareness that organizations can build within their communities, the more you will see the legislator becoming a champion because it's something their constituents care about. And so, that means showing up to town halls. That means asking questions at the town halls. That means sending emails to legislators so that it is an issue that is top of mind. Becky, you know that there are a million different things happening at the Capitol on any single day. And so that's why it requires that constant kind of caring and feeding of legislators, because it's easy to get distracted with the one crisis or the one fire that we have to put out on that given day. But if there's a constant drumbeat and a constant engagement from constituents and organizations, it makes that one issue rise to the top of the list more often. And what I would say is everybody has different approaches and different strategies, but the more constructive one can be, the better. And that means, there is some outside work. Sometimes you have to be loud and angry to get people's attention in politics. But the more you can sit down and have a real conversation, tell your individual story, talk about why that issue is important to you, the more it will become something that the legislator or the elected official really is going to start caring about as well. So there's no one size fits all, but the answer really has to be constant engagement. And you should have a goal in mind, right? And it might not be a single bill. It could be the goal now is to educate and engage and build champions. And in 12 months, we're going to introduce a bill that's going to do X, Y, or Z, and we're going to be prepared to get that bill across the finish line because of that work that we did on the front end. So, the writing a bill or coming up with a policy idea is not the beginning. It's kind of the midway point, if not towards the end. There's a lot of work that has to be done on the front end to build those champions so it's an issue that can be successful at the Capitol.
Thanks, Senator. And maybe building off of some of that, I know you have an incredibly busy schedule. I know that because I bug you and make it busier often. But you're not alone in that. Other legislators do as well. And you mentioned that there's a lot of issues that are happening. What do you as a legislator find most helpful in learning about a new issue? Is it someone sees you at a coffee shop and they say, hey, this thing happened? Or is it a more formal conversation? Is it town halls? What do you think is the best sort of mechanism to help legislators learn about new issues and provide them support to engage and hopefully lead on these issues?
Yeah, it's a good question. I just before this call, I had to run out to the hardware store and got stopped in the aisle and had a long conversation about a particular topic, and that definitely happens. And honestly, you should do it. Legislators are members of your communities, and we are citizen legislators. We're not professional politicians, so you got to grab us whenever you can. But it's all of the above. However, the tidbit I would offer is that the more you can tell your personal story, the better. So for instance, I've had, people have reached out to me, this is a random example, on tax policy and why certain tax policies impact them in a way that they think is unfair. And sometimes this outreach comes from people that work in the agricultural sector. I'm not a farmer. I don't work in the ag industry. I also am by no means an expert on tax policy. It's not the area I work in. So honestly, when people talk to me about some of those topics, I just sort of glaze over, and it's hard for me to totally understand the real life impacts of what they're talking about. But I recently had a conversation and visited a small business, and they showed me the impact. They showed me why certain equipment is taxed at a different rate than the others, and why it's counterintuitive because that equipment is actually better for the environment versus the other stuff that's traditional, but we give it a tax break. And that was when it sort of clicked for me. And all of a sudden now, if someone brings up that issue again, I know what they're talking about and I feel for them and I get it. So the more you can tell your story, the more you can put a human face to a lot of these things, the better it's going to be. Again, I'm not an expert, frankly, on anything. I know a little bit about a lot of things. So don't expect the legislators to be experts, but that doesn't mean they can't understand your story and sort of your personal relationship with the issue that you care about. And so you should tell that story as much as possible. I've always thought politics really is about storytelling. If you think about Barack Obama's rise in the political world, it was because of the story he told about himself. He was effective, but it was also a narrative that he told that really is what got people's attention. And so tell your narrative, tell the stories that you think are important, because that will resonate so much more than facts and data points. Use all of those facts and data points as well, but you want to really sort of use your personal experience and your compelling story to sort of get your foot in the door and really allow people to open up and understand the situation from your viewpoint.
Great, thanks so much. And we're having a little tech issue with Representative Gray, but he's working on joining us. So we're gonna keep plowing ahead and you can, get all the good stuff first, right? So thank you for that. I think your comment about people being able to see things and put them into context, I always find helpful as well. I think if there's tours or events that people can come see firsthand, it's usually really helpful. Similarly, I think at the Capitol, people don't always understand some of the process and things that happen behind the scenes. So a lot of people in this audience may have come to the Capitol for a tour, maybe sat in on a committee hearing, but they may not understand some of the kind of elements that go in behind the scenes of all of that work as well. And so much like if you're here working at the butterfly pavilions, there's a lot that happens around the clock, separate from just when people come here to meet pollinators or other insects that are here. If you're holding Rosie, you don't maybe know all the work that goes into feeding and caring for Rosie. I think folks joining legislative committee hearings don't know all the work that goes into feeding and caring for legislators as well. And so I was just wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about what you think makes those processes really successful. So someone's done the work, they've gotten the attention of a legislator, they're really bought in, they've brought a bill, they're running that bill and they're in committee. What do you think are some of the elements that really makes that resonate with other members, makes those hearings really effective? And how can people who aren't in that space day in and day out be really prepped when they get in the door?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I would say, there are several aspects to this. One is you want to make sure that you prep, if you do have a champion for that issue and they're sponsoring a bill for you or whatever, you want to help them too, right? Because at the end of the day, these elected officials, again, are not probably the issue expert. They're just sort of like the vehicle for your issue. And so you want to make sure they are prepared and they feel confident in carrying that water for you. So a lot of it has to do with before you even step foot into that committee room, making sure that things are ready and prepared, and that there are lifelines for that legislator if they get asked questions that they don't know an answer to, and things like that. And then for others, I think you want as much as possible to prepare them as well, even if you don't know if they support your bill. So having that individual one-on-one meetings, if you can get it, and if you can't get it, then you should grab them when they're on the way to the restroom and force them to talk to you for a minute, because that happens every single day. And it can be something that the lobbyists have gotten really good at, but it's also something that regular people should do as well. You don't have to come down to the Capitol only when there's a committee hearing. You can go whenever, and you can go to that person's office. You can find them when they're going in between meetings, things like that. And it's very accepted and expected and normal, is a critical part of the process. So, I would say when you get to the committee, you typically will have about 3 minutes, which is not nearly enough to probably make the most compelling speech you could think of, but it's enough to get something across to people. And what I would say is, you want to make sure that you are not repeating other speakers, but instead talking again from your personal experience, if you have one, or your individual thoughts on that particular topic. So instead of sort of reading off of the fact sheet that maybe the previous 10 people are already read from, you should think about how to tell your reason for being there today. Why do you care about it? Is it because of your grandkids? Is it because of your business experience? Is it because of the community you're from? Tell that story and that reason as much as possible, put a human face to it. I think the other thing that's important is to research who the committee members are and what they care about. Because on most bills, I think the member goes into that committee hearing pretty sure they know how they're going to vote on everything that's on the agenda. But that doesn't mean they are locked in by any means. It's just they probably have a preconceived opinion. If you can figure out a way to tell a story or say something that touches that individual or is about something that they care about in particular, I think you can make headway. And so, think about that. Look into the background of these people. Look into if they have kids. Look into where they grew up and what their hobbies are and things like that, because it gives you a sense of who they are as people. And, politics in many ways is about relationships, just like almost any job. And caring about other people and, being interested in what they care about goes a long way. And I think you, as just a regular individual at a committee hearing, you can do that. It doesn't have to only be the job for a regular for a lobbyist or a professional. I think there's a lot you can do one-on-one, but also in committee, in how you tell your story and who you speak to on the committee. You might not be speaking to all 5 or all 7 of the members, but maybe you've decided as one person that you have a story that you think could resonate with them. Speak only to them, literally look them in the eye, make eye contact and talk to them, and just pretend like the other members aren't there, because you are trying to influence one person, and that could be the difference of getting a bill out of committee.
Thanks, Senator. I think that's really good advice. And as someone who lurks the halls of the Capitol on a mostly daily basis, I will say, while we spend a lot of time with you all and get to know you well, there's, I don't know, maybe a tolerance that gets met. And it's nice to have different voices and faces in the building to talk to folks. And I guess I would also always encourage people, like, if you're an accountant who cares a lot about pollinators, you can talk about how that's part of your day-to-day life. And I think to your point about not having just the same comments that might be on the fact sheet already and what that looks like is a really valid one, that, really personalizing and tailoring it helps. So thank you for that advice. And I'm really pleased to welcome Representative Matt Gray. I know we had a little tech challenge, so thanks for weathering that with us, Representative Gray. And thank you so much for joining us today. And we really appreciate you being here. So we've been talking a little bit about some of what makes for effective efforts at the Capitol, and Senator Finberg has shared some of his perspective. Representative Gray is on the House Finance Committee, the House Transportation Committee. He does a ton of work in the legislature on issues ranging from economic justice, transportation, environmental issues. He played a leading role on paid family leave legislation before that ultimately was won at the ballot, and has been involved in some big heavy lifts as well. We've had Senator Finberg speaking a little bit to what helps sort of catch attention of legislators and some really effective strategies for work in the building. But I wanted maybe to pivot a little to you, Representative Gray, and talk about how to get through the hard stuff a little bit. And Senator Finberg, you should certainly chime in here as well. But I'm going to put Rep Gray on the spot since he's now joined us, and we'll give you a moment to hydrate and think if you want. But Rep Gray, you've worked on a number of big bills. Both of you worked on the transportation legislation this year. That was a beast. That was a big one. Collaboration is a big part of that, but also sometimes things kind of get stuck. And I guess, could you speak to us a little bit about, even if you're not running something maybe the scale of that kind of bill, how do you work through the hard stuff at the legislature? How do you work through colleagues or others who maybe aren't quite on board yet? And what are some strategies that you've seen either others in the legislature you've used, or even advocates use to kind of help break through the log jams when they happen?
Yeah, I think, and thank you all for having me, frankly. Excuse me. I think one of the biggest challenges is patience in listening a lot, even though you know exactly what you want to do. I can walk in with an idea of, I want to make the world a better place by doing this or that. But there are a bunch of other people who are going to look at my idea and they're going to be like, well, that's actually going to make things worse for me. And listening to all of them and figuring out if there's a way to get both done at the same time, that you can address their concerns, but also do the thing you want to do that made you show up in the first place, because there's, whether it's somebody in this network or legislators, nobody's there getting rich doing this. It's doing it to make the world a better place. But the biggest challenge to doing hard stuff is listening first also. When Majority Leader Fenberg and I and the Speaker and Senator Winter did transportation, we literally had hundreds of meetings with anybody who wanted to come and talk to us, because it was such a complicated thing. And also we wanted to be able to look everybody in the eye and say we're doing right by them. And when you're doing big things, you have to be able to do that, because even the best, noblest ideas are going to have some detractors, but that doesn't mean that you can't work past them. It doesn't mean that you can't win. And all you need to do is get the number of votes you need to win, but to do it responsibly and to get the hard things done, that means talking to the people who, when they first hear this idea, they really dislike it. They think it's really bad. And both listening to them and thinking about ways that you could get your goals accomplished, even though, you're doing some things that some other people want, but it's still enough. And also convincing them that, look, this idea I have is not that big a threat. You're scared of it, but you don't need to be. And let me explain to you why the things you're scared of, you don't need to be worried about. But I think that's sort of the biggest thing to getting the hard, big projects done, is talking to everyone, listening to everyone, and then trying to build. The big ideas are never perfect. Like that, the transportation bill we did was, we didn't crack 300 pages, but we got close. Because that's how complicated it was, though. It's not because it was like every one of those words mattered, but it involved hours and hours and hours of conversations. And that's the thing, is like, to do the big stuff, you've got to buckle down and be willing to do the work, even if you wind up disagreeing with people.
Thanks. I think that's helpful perspective, and that something that Senator Finberg also spoke to. Sometimes it's patience and persistence in that is part of it, and that could be short and long term. So I guess maybe one question, and we asked Senator Finberg earlier, Rep. Gray, sort of what helps put an issue on the radar for you when constituents approach you, kind of what's useful background and info. I might pivot slightly off of that to, if you're working on a bill and working in partnership with organizations or individuals like we have here today, whether we're pollinator legislation or other things, what kind of on-the-ground work in community do you think helps make a difference in terms of getting things done? And not every bill needs, ads on TV and, 4-page ads in the Denver Post or something. I don't think we're talking about that kind of situation, but what work in community do you see reflected back into the legislative process as like the most helpful for moving some of these issues forward, be they really big and expansive or more narrow? What do you think, what advice, I guess, do you have to this group about what to be doing in their communities?
Yeah, I would say for what we call inside the building, for passing legislation at the legislature, on the ground organizing, finding people within the districts of the folks you're trying to touch. Majority Leader Finberg was saying before, looking at who's on the committee, whose votes do you need? And it's hard work to find, but it's important work to find somebody who is in that person's district, who this issue is really important to. I've passed probably 5 or 6 bills on issues that I would never have thought once about. But if somebody from my community comes to me and says, I want to talk to you about this is important to me, people really are really, really responsive to that, because we take our job seriously. We get, I'm sure Majority Finberg gets more than I do, but we get a ton of meeting requests for people who are just want to talk about issues that we're not necessarily working on. And a lot of those fall by the wayside because we only have so many hours. But if there's a really dedicated person who can say, look, I live at, I live in the Broadlands, to me, in Broomfield. And this is an issue that we have going on right now. It makes my ears perk up quite a bit more than just, I'm interested in a political issue, and I want to sit and talk with you about it. Because it's not that the legislators don't respect everybody's opinions. We absolutely do. But the act of being a legislator, especially if you're like myself or Majority Leader Finberg, and you're also being a parent, and you're also figuring out the rest of your life at the same time. We're a part-time legislature, right? We can't take all the meetings that are asked for. And so finding, if your organization realizes we need to contact Senator Zenzinger or Representative Byrd or, you name it, finding somebody who has real life experience with the problem that you think we need to address that is in their district, it can be hard, but it's really effective. It's worked for me several times. There have been several times that the first meeting I had with somebody, I was like, I hear what you're saying, but I don't know if that's something I can work on. And then when it's a business owner in my district who comes and says, look, this is how we keep this restaurant open, then all of a sudden I'm like, all right, let's roll up our sleeves and do it. But and that, not just businesses or anything, but for anything, that's what I would say. If you're a grassroots level person, finding people in people's districts where they can be like, oh yeah, I do know that neighborhood and there's a problem in that neighborhood. I do know that business, there's a problem with that business, is really effective as far as getting from grassroots level to having us, put things on bill paper and sending them to committees.
Great, thanks. And I think both you and Senator Finberg touched a lot on that ability to have those local conversations. One thing that was mentioned before was local town halls. I think those are always a really great tool without having to track someone down, find a meeting, et cetera. There's also lots of opportunities where you all as legislators also host town halls and invite people to kind of come meet with you in a bigger audience. So thank you both for that. We're nearing the end of the questions I have. We're going to open it up for some Q&A from the audience here shortly. If folks have questions, you can go ahead and put those in the chat now, and we'll start working through them in a moment. I guess I wanted to just pivot a little more to like very specifically on pollinators. Pollinator health, protecting their habitat, thinking about threats to pollinators is pressing. That's why so many folks are here today, not just in the policy space, but also thinking about what can be done and local collaboration, et cetera, science, all these different levels where we might be able to make change for pollinators. So I guess I would just maybe close our sort of official questions so far with the two of you. What's the best specific guidance or advice you have to folks in this group who may want to run policies to protect pollinator health, which could, run a gamut of issues, but do you have any specific sort of advice you would give this group as they think about going forward this year, next year, beyond?
I think on this issue especially, we have to put the work in to build relationships with unlikely allies. Because, the science may tell us what the right policy is. But at the end of the day, some of these decisions and the way people feel about some of these policies really comes down to culture and less about facts and science. And so we, as a community that cares about this issue, we have to figure out how we build relationships and build bridges with the ag community, with different, rural local governments, or what have you, or frankly, the chemical companies, which, it doesn't mean that we will come up with a solution that they love based on that relationship. But I think it's important to have the relationship so then when the conflict arises, there are more tools and there's more context on how to manage those disagreements. The word that is thrown around in the legislature more than anything is stakeholder. And sometimes it's used as an excuse for why they are just saying, kill that bill. They didn't stakehold it enough, and it's totally not accurate. But sometimes it's true. And you don't want to you don't want to fail because of a process issue. You want to fail because it's a bad policy, or you didn't have the votes, or you didn't make it quite far enough, and you'll try again next time. But not because of an unforced error, like not talking to certain people or hearing their opinions. And I think it's really important to ask to get into the weeds on the negotiations and the compromise, and ask opponents and those other folks that maybe wouldn't normally be an ally, ask them what they could live with, or ask them, if there are one or two changes to make you a little more comfortable with this bill, what would they be? And just see where that kind of conversation can go. It's really important to do that work. It's really helpful when an opponent comes to a committee and says, we're asking for a no vote, but I do want to thank Senator Finberg for working with us and making some compromises and really hearing us out, and we appreciate it. Then there's no excuse for like, oh, well, I guess Steve didn't listen to them, and he didn't take those meetings, and he didn't take their opinion seriously. That no longer is on the table. And so you want to at least get to that point where maybe there's still a no vote and they're asking for a no vote, but you want them to acknowledge that the right process was followed and the work was done and there was respect along the way. And I think that's something that all of us that are going to be working on bills, especially around this issue, which at the heart of it, I think is kind of a cultural and sort of lifestyle issue, right? People don't want to be told that they can't spray pesticides or that they have to do a certain thing because it feels like you're infringing on their rights to do what they need to do. So that's kind of one thing that comes to mind is really thinking about how to build those relationships, how to make it based on mutual respect, because you might not always get there with them and get them on board with your policy, but it goes a long way in the Capitol if you do that work in the front end.
Thank you. Rep. Gray, do you have any similar guidance or advice for us specific to
Yeah, I
pollinators?
mean, I think I think process-wise, everything the Majority Leader Fenberg just said is right. I would also say on these particular issues, I think that especially on the House side, we've got a lot more new people. You know, like all of our experienced good people go and work with Steve over there, and they leave the House and go to the Senate. But there's a lot of folks who are not as familiar, and I think that as far as making arguments go, I think that the hardest thing for a lot of people to get their head around is that protecting pollinators is also about protecting human health. Like it's not just like you know, opposition will want to make it like, well, are you going to choose butterflies or humans? And understanding that how key pollinators are to human health. In a session where I believe we're going to be talking at great length about environmental quality, air quality, climate, like all of that is coming, and talking about how pollinators have an impact on that and how that has an impact on people, I think is really important. Because when people are dismissive of pollinators, it's when they're just like, well, look, I got to choose between the human over there and the bee over there, and I choose the human over the bee. And like Majority Leader Fenberg said, it's not as simple as that, but having our people actually understand that yes, we do care about the animals, but also we care about the secondary effects of what the animals do and how they make people's lives better. I think is something that is a never-ending task, because we get new people all the time. Like that process of educating lawmakers is a never-ending task. So for all the folks who are on the call right now, like just know that like you're going to get new people all the time, and there's not that many people who come in with a natural understanding of pollinators and their role in the ecosystem and how that affects our larger environment. But the arguments that land for a lot of people a lot stronger is not just this is how nature was originally, as much as this is a really important part of our economy and our health and our ecosystem in general, to protect people, their jobs, their livelihoods, and also their health. I think is really important, because those are the things that land with a lot more lawmakers than just wild animals that I don't know. Which again, I don't mean to say that dismissively. I don't think of it that way. Just know that that's the mindset of some people.
Thanks, and thank you both. I think those are both really helpful insights as we look towards next year. Similarly, I guess my sort of last piece here would be, are there other just bigger conversations you think are moving in 2022 during the legislative session that this group should keep in mind, because there may be an opportunity to do work around pollinator health that might make those decisions harder? Anything on the horizon you would flag for folks worried and thinking about how to protect pollinators that could be coming at us in the next year and we should be prepping for if we aren't already?
I mean, I'll go first on this one. I think that I think in the environmental space, and especially in air quality space, you're going to see legislation this year. I'm not, and this is another good lesson in how to be a citizen advocate. I don't know the interplay between pollinator health and air quality, but I'm sure it exists, because to my knowledge, they breathe air. But bringing your expertise to us and saying, when we're talking about air quality, for example, here's there are a number of ways you can do it, but here are the ways we can target to make sure we're protecting pollinator health would be great, because I've been in meetings about some of these things. I can't tell you how it would affect pollinators right now. Now, there's no legislation. It's just like it's a conversation we're having. But bringing your expertise on broader environmental health, broader transportation, like other things that we do to change the world that we live in, giving us the information that we need to know how we can do it smartly with respect to pollinators would be fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We're still trying to wrap our head around exactly what the session is going to be about and working with our members. Like you said at the front end, Becky, and just so everybody knows, the state legislature is not Congress, for better or for worse. And what that means is that members can actually introduce bills on whatever they want, and every single bill will get a committee hearing and a vote. And so some of this is about what do we as leaders in the legislature want the session to be about. Some of it's also, we just need to find out from our members what they're going to be working on, because they get the right to work on whatever they want. And so I'm sure there will be a lot of opportunities that Matt and I don't even know about yet. But I think he's right. There will be environmental and climate and air quality issues that absolutely come up. I think there will also be opportunities through the budget to make sure, whether it's CDPHE or the Department of Ag, that we are using resources to prioritize the values that we have and how those departments touch upon issues that impact pollinators and public lands and things like that. The other issue I've been thinking about is just the role of science in public policy. I think that will come up through various pieces of legislation and conversations, and I think it's very relevant for this conversation, of course. So there are several items that I think will come up that will play a role in impacting pollinators. I also think there's going to be more and more conversation around land use and how we do or don't allow communities to expand, and taking into account whether there's transit or whether we're just going to let people sprawl and drive everywhere forever, or if we're going to incentivize smarter ways for communities to develop. And that obviously has an impact on pollinators and wildlife. So I think there will be several issues that touch upon it, and then there may be some issues that are more directly involved with the issue.
Great, thanks. I'm going to pivot to a question that was submitted and builds off something that Congressman Neguse talked about. So Rep. Gray, Congressman Neguse sent us a video, and he talked a little bit about his work to look at establishing the Civilian Climate Corps and what might go into the Build Back Better legislation. But broadly, the goal of strengthening the natural resource worker force. And so one of the questions we've gotten is, do you all think that we could translate some of that federal excitement into those state workforce level? What kind of opportunities might there be for things like apprenticeships for young people or retired people to work on natural resources, maybe including collecting data? And hopefully I have captured that question correctly. But do you all have thoughts about what it might look like to integrate some of that energy at the state level?
No, I mean, going back to whether we talked about it before, I think that having pollinator health be a part of the broader climate conversation, to the extent that we've got funding around it, I think is really, really important, because it's not the first thing that people think about. Like they think about coal power plants and tailpipe emissions and that sort of thing, and they don't think about how the role that the pollinators and having wildlife takes carbon out of the atmosphere. The extent to which the pollinators do the things that we need to do to take carbon out of the atmosphere, when carbon is such an important, removing carbon as fast as we can is so important. With respect to the federal government, I think that advocacy with the members of Congress and with us matters. It's very hard for me to understand what's going to happen with Congress, so I'm sort of a wait and see guy with Congress, because and every time a week goes by, what they tell us they're going to do changes. But it's also true that they do things sometimes. Like we've got committees meeting right now to talk about how to allocate federal resources. And we had a constitutional amendment that failed on Tuesday night that would have hamstrung some of that process, but it failed. So yes, I mean, the answer is, I think there are, to the extent we really do, because Congressman Neguse has been working on the Climate Corps for such a long time, and he's succeeded with his leadership. I hope he gets it in the bill, and I hope the bill ever passes. But I'm always sort of in a wait and see mood with respect to Congress, and with respect to what we do. We generally always push forward, assuming nothing from Congress, because it's always better to be pleasantly surprised than to assume somebody else is going to solve your problems and then nothing happens. Like Majority Leader Fenberg and I worked on the transportation bill. Well, there's theoretically a infrastructure bill that theoretically is going to come from the federal government. Well, we didn't sit around and wait for it. That's been I would love it. I would love to see it happen, but it's been infrastructure week for the last 4 years now, 5 years, 6 years, I don't know. So we didn't wait to do it. So I would say, yes, keep in mind, and yes, call you a member of Congress, but also for the stuff that we can do in Colorado, we pass a lot more bills than they do. we pass hundreds of bills all the time. And so pay attention to that, focus, like watch what they're doing, but also don't like, if you see something on CNN says, oh, Congress is going to do this, not Congress has done it, then don't assume it's going to happen because it changes all the time.
That's good advice. Maybe the other piece to tie some of this together, we've had a few questions around the importance of soil health and protecting pollinators and how different threats to pollinators, different approaches to pesticide use, et cetera, all impact soil health. So when you tie some of that together, I think a common issue there might be the maybe appetite you all spoke to and interest of working on climate and how we connect climate and soil health. To me, one thing that jumps out is potentially trying to find funding for innovative projects and things of that nature. I know there are there's lots of interest in how to spend state money along with how to spend federal money. Any advice beyond what you've talked about today, or in addition, or repeating the same advice if you think that's a helpful piece, about how to try to maximize resources into things specifically like soil health?
I would say this is kind of tactical, and I'll just be direct. I think we need to find champions on the Republican side of the aisle for this, because in a lot of ways, that solution is so important and is going to happen in their districts and is core to the future for the livelihoods of the ag industry. And so I think the more we can figure out how to make it a win-win, and for Republicans to join with Democrats on thinking about soil health, and also in doing it in a way that provides incentives and a lifeline to struggling farmers and ranchers, I think has to be part of it. And part of that, like you said, Becky, is funding. Some of it could be things that don't cost hard dollars, right? It could be tax credits or incentives and different approaches. So I think, that has to be part of it. That has to be part of the approach, is partnering again with folks that are very much in the eye of the storm on these issues, but we don't naturally maybe see them as allies, but they should be and they could be.
Thanks. Anything to add, Rep. Gray? Great. All right, I have one last question. It might divide all of us. Do you have a favorite pollinator?
Oh, I consider my dog a pollinator because she sniffs everything when I take her on walks. So she's definitely pollinating things. And she's over here sleeping and really bored with me being on Zoom all day. So I would say my dog.
And I am contractually obligated as this may actually offend people. As Broomfield has officially stolen the butterfly pavilion from Westminster, and I represent Broomfield, I'm officially required to say the butterfly. That's actually part of representing Broomfield. I don't really have a choice about that, so I have to go butterfly because of the thievery. And sorry to anybody in Westminster. Sorry, but we stole a little bit.
We'll let them know who to call and yell at. All right. Well, I really thank you both for joining us. Thank you all for the great questions. I think hopefully we got to a number of the questions. I guess I'll just close by saying, People in Pollinators Action Network is really excited to continue our work at the legislature. It's really helpful to hear what is of interest to tackle in that space so that we can help shepherd that along, pull people into those conversations, tell you which member town hall to show up at, et cetera. So as folks have thought about this panel, if something jumped out for you and you have an issue you think we should look at and look at working on now or in the future, we would really welcome that feedback, and please send it along. Joyce at PPAN is a great resource for that, but we'd love to talk more. And so please don't hesitate to send those ideas along. I just really, really thank you both for being there. If we were here in person, I'd tell people to give you a round of applause, but I guess we'll just do some Zoom applause. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks so much for that enlightening session, and thanks so much to Senator Finberg and Representative Gray for joining us, and thanks to Becky for organizing the session. We're going to take another 15-minute break here, so feel free and make a pit stop, grab your coffee, tea, before we start our third session on community collaborations. Just one note that I wanted to bring to everybody's attention. You might want to check your email for your last message from the Colorado Pollinator Network, because within that email was a registration link if you wanted to join us tomorrow morning at the Denver Botanic Gardens for an collaborative exploration meeting. And so Olivia, our keynote speaker, will be there in person. So this is your chance for free to come and meet with her. If you've got a copy of The Bees in Your Backyard, bring it, you'll get it signed. So feel free and check your email. I'll try and bring that link up at the closing remarks so that we can all make sure we have the opportunity to register. All right, thanks so much. See you soon.